Hello, today we'll be discussing nuances and challenges in cross-cultural communication. Your organization would like to expand your training in order to communicate effectively with employees and suppliers abroad. We have informed that all are English speaking. However, some of the workforce and partners are from China, Germany, and Saudi Arabia. We will cover barriers to effective communications, challenges in cross-cultural communications, and some cultural etiquette that will assist in your future endeavors. Cross-cultural communication matters. Clear communication is essential to build trust, collaborate efficiently, and avoid costly misunderstandings. In a diverse global workforce, effective communication enhances productivity and strengthens the company's competitive edge. Hilton in 2007 said cultural proficiency doesn't mean memorizing every cultural nuance of every market. It's knowing when to listen, when to ask for help, and when, finally, to speak. Cultural nuances to watch for. A Chinese supplier will want to develop a level of trust. So small talk at the start of a meeting is quite common and appreciated, as is an exchange of business cards. So when providing your business card to a Chinese counterpart, present it with both hands and take a short amount of time to review their card in return. Also, there's a hierarchy, and Chinese professionals, when attending a meeting, they will enter the room accordingly. The most senior professional will enter first. When doing business with your Germany professionals, you can expect direct communication from your German partners. They value efficiency, punctuality, and valuing the collective good over individual desires. And as for Saudi Arabia, this becomes a little more complicated, a little more nuanced. We need not only watch for cultural nuances, but also religious protocols, as Saudi Arabia is a Muslim country. Sharing a meal or tea is a good first step when working towards a deal or business partnership. Saudis also love to chat to start a meeting. So the work week in Saudi Arabia is Sunday to Thursday, so keep that in mind when scheduling. Additionally, the holy month of Ramadan will likely result in fewer daytime meetings as Muslims fast from sunrise to sunset. The Hajj, keep this in mind, is an annual pilgrimage to Mecca, and schedulers need to be aware of that date as well. Also, dress code is quite important to be knowledgeable about. As most Saudi women professionals, they'll be dressed in the abaya. This consists of non-revealing loose clothing and a head cover known as a hijab. This is what is the top right picture of your presentation. This is just a general representation. Some Saudi women professionals are fully veiled in the black niqab, which covers the entire body, reveals only the eyes. It is important to avoid shaking hands with women workers who are dressed this way. If there are any in their party who wish to not shake hands, simply put your hand over your heart, smile, and nod. That is the polite gesture. So now we're going to discuss common barriers to effective communication. Uh, Something that all of us have experienced at one point or another is communication apprehension. I've never called it that myself. I think of it as stage fright. I get very, very nervous speaking in front of people. A lot of people experience stage fright when giving a speech, when giving a presentation in front of a class. However, it goes beyond that. It goes deeper than that. It could be just speaking one-on-one with a coworker. It could be sending an email to a supervisor. It can go to something just as simple as that. And so it can really limit participation or idea sharing. And then language context difference, we have to be very careful when using slang or jargon outside of our own organization, because someone outside of our company may not know what we're talking about because it's very company centric. So we have to maybe be careful not to use those type of terms that may be taken out of context. And a lack of active listening, when we don't hear, not only we're only hearing what somebody's saying, we're not actually in tune with what they're thinking, with what they're feeling. It just turns into an empty conversation. And so communication is really just, it's superficial, and we're not getting to the heart of what they're trying to get across to us. And as far as assumptions and stereotypes, misjudgment based on preconceived notions, that can happen based off of someone's religion, their appearance, and the world we live in is really no place for that. And we have to be very, very careful when we are working with our Saudi partners to not use those stereotypes or make any kind of faux pas or misstep based off of their religion, based off of their clothing, anything like that. That is uncouth and it's uncalled for. So we have to be very courteous, very gracious, very kind, and stay away from any of those stereotypes. And then nonverbal cues, gestures, or expressions, they have different meanings in different cultures. And so we'll have to just, like, one, Saudi Arabians, they don't want you to have the soles of your feet facing them. They feel very disrespected. I know I've read a story before that in England, a peace sign, depending on which way you have it facing them, it could be a vulgar gesture. And so those little things can really mean a lot. And then also, as far as like a high context culture, such as China or Saudi Arabia, high context meaning information is conveyed through nonverbal cues, context, and shared understanding. They rely on those type of kind of inward implicit cues, whereas a low context country or culture such as Germany, low context meaning their communication style is they need the details conveyed through the message, very direct. So if we're working with a German partner and we're using more of a implicit type of communication style with a German counterpart, that communication that's going to fail and our negotiations are going to break down because we're not communicating effectively with the other person across the table. And so we really need to hone in on what they're looking for, and we need to focus on their words, their meaning, and we need to bridge that cultural gap. So there are 9 levels of differences that can affect cross-cultural communication. However, today we'll be highlighting the 5 most relevant for communication with colleagues and suppliers in China, Germany, and Saudi Arabia. So number 1 is formality. China's hierarchical culture strongly emphasizes titles, a respect for seniority and politeness. Germany also values formality, professional titles, and direct address matter. And in Saudi Arabia, they use formal greetings. And showing respect is crucial, especially in a business setting. Number 2, indirectness. In China, indirect communication is common to avoid confrontation and save face. In Germany, generally more direct, but can still show subtlety in sensitive topics. And in Saudi Arabia, high context communication, such as messages, are often delivered indirectly to maintain harmony and respect. Number 3, when to talk. China, the hierarchy and respect influences who speaks first. Juniors may wait for seniors to speak. And in Germany, turn taking is generally very structured, and interruptions can be seen as rude. And then in Saudi Arabia, deference to seniority and hospitality. And then pauses to reflect are very common. Number 4, paces and pausing. China, pauses signify respect or thoughtfulness, and silence can be meaningful. And in Germany, efficient pacing and extended silence may feel uncomfortable. And then finally, in Saudi Arabia, silence is common and can reflect respect or contemplation. And then last, number 5, leadership. For China, listeners can often show attentiveness through silence and minimal back channeling. And then in Germany, active listening includes nodding and verbal feedback to show engagement, while in Saudi Arabia, non-verbal listening cues may rely on indirect cues to show attentiveness. And so those are the 5 most relevant for communication with colleagues and suppliers in China, Germany, and Saudi Arabia. Nonverbal communication is as important as words. Gestures, eye contact, even silence can carry different meanings across cultures. For example, direct eye contact is valued in Germany, but may be seen as disrespectful in some Asian cultures. A handshake can make or break nonverbal action. In China, handshakes are standard and respectful. However, as we discussed previously, when greeting a Saudi Arabian coworker or business partner, men should wait for women to initiate the handshake. And then if a woman is dressed in a niqab, avoid shaking hands. And as I mentioned before, if another person isn't willing to shake hands, place your hand on your heart, smile, and nod your head. And so there are several different types of nonverbal communication, such as your facial expressions and gesture, as mentioned, eye contact. Also, there are different levels of personal space, different degrees or distances of personal space and touch. Some countries are shown to like 38 inches. That's where they speak. Some countries like 36 inches. Other countries are close talkers, and that's going to make the United States feel very uncomfortable. And so we're going to use silence and pauses. We're going to use those strategically in our conversations. And then also display emotions with our hands, with our eyes, with our face, to relay how we're feeling, how maybe something that somebody has done has affected us, or what maybe they've presented a gift to us at a business meeting. But all of those nonverbal communications, nonverbal cues, they're very, very important and can really go a long way when dealing with cross-cultural negotiations, or even just an employee in a global marketplace. So let's focus on strategies to overcome communication barriers. We have three key strategies. First, active listening is essential. Paying close attention to what's said and how it's said. Look for verbal and nonverbal cues. To promote mutual understanding, repeating what you've heard can be beneficial. This approach not only demonstrates respect for the speaker, but also helps avoid any potential misunderstandings. Second, battling communication apprehension is important. Some team members might feel nervous speaking up or when asked to give a presentation. So according to Scandura 2020, self-awareness and assertiveness training are recommended to overcome communication apprehension. Also, one-on-one tutoring can be an effective tool. That way it's a very small audience and you're giving a presentation to one. And then you can build up from there, build the confidence from there, and hopefully be able to give presentations to a larger audience as you grow. And then lastly, adapting your language styles. It can make communication more effective. Use simpler, more direct language when needed. And again, avoid slang or idiomatic expressions that may be confusing. Adjust the level of formality to match the culture expectation of your audience. So by practicing active listening, reducing communication anxiety, and adapting language styles, you can build stronger connections and foster more effective communications across cultures. So here are just several practical or real-world examples that highlight how cultural differences affect communication. First, in China, team members may hesitate to provide direct feedback out of respect and a desire to save face or to not humiliate another team member, especially if the input or feedback is negative. If necessary, they may pull that team member aside after a meeting and provide that feedback privately. So that will save face for that team member. In Germany, a supplier might expect directness and a structured agenda, which could be abrupt to those that are more relationship-oriented cultures. And then in Saudi Arabia, a colleague may use indirect language or prioritize building trust before entering business details. Nonverbal cues like eye contact, gestures, personal space may also cause misunderstandings about trust and respect. And then lastly, silence during meetings can be interpreted differently. Some see it as respectful contemplation, others as disagreement or confusion. We can better navigate cross-cultural interactions and build stronger relationships by understanding these practical examples. So now we've come to our conclusion and some key takeaways. Understanding and respecting cultural differences are key to effective communication in international settings. And to establish trust, it's essential to engage in active listening. Additionally, one should adapt their communication style to correspond with the cultural context, particularly in forms of formality, indirectness, and language usage. Be aware of nonverbal cues and create an environment where everyone feels comfortable sharing their ideas. And remember, cultural competence is a continuous learning process. Thank you for your attention and your time, and let's work together to make our communication more effective across borders.